Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world. We welcome you wholeheartedly to our IMRF side event From the Classroom to the UN, integrating the Global Compact on Migration and the International Migration Reform into academic education. My name is Daniel Naujoks. I'm a professor at Columbia University's School of International Public Affairs. I am also the coordinator for our forced committee on forced migration, and I've worked on the intersection of global governance, UN work, as well as migration. And I often joke I work on everything that moves. I work on immigration, integration, on emigration, on refugees, on diasporas. And this year, it has been 10 years since the global community adopted the New York Declaration. The New York Declaration, adopted in 2016, was the starting point for the two global compacts, the GCM, the GCR, the Global Compact on Refugees and for Migration, which are two of the key tools that we have for global governance on migration and refugee issues. Today, we're talking more about the Global Compact on Migration, and which was then adopted in 2018. As many of you will know, next week we'll have the second International Migration Review Forum, IMRF, which follows the first one we had 4 years ago, 2022. So these are very important milestones for discussing, for taking stock of what these global compacts have done. And we are going to do this today by looking at what academia can do, what teaching, one of the core aspects of universities' activities, can contribute to these discussions. I assume many of you will be vaguely aware of what the GCM is, but I want to run you down through a very, very brief overview of what this compact actually is. So it has 10 cross-cutting and interdependent guiding principles. It works on international cooperation. It's people-centered. It centers national sovereignty. We can discuss what that means. The rule of law and due process. Sustainable development is mainstreamed. It has a focus on human rights. It is gender responsive, child sensitive, and it promotes both a whole of government approach, meaning not just one migration ministry, but many different ministries, and a whole of society approach, meaning that civil society, NGOs, faith-based organizations, migrants, diaspora organizations, etc., should also be part of the migration governance as envisioned by the Global Compact. And when it comes to the substance, really, it has 23 objectives, which cover basically anything you can imagine with regard to global mobility. It is on data, on the drivers that make people move. It's about information on migration. It's about legal identity. It looks at pathways on regular migration, recruitment of migrant workers. It's specifically focused on vulnerabilities, saving lives, smuggling, trafficking, managing borders, but also on migration procedures and detention of migrants, on the consular protection of migrants, access to basic services, inclusion, discrimination, skills development, migrants and diasporas contributing to development, remittances, return migration, social security entitlements, and lastly, how can we build global partnerships to enable all of these aspects. So again, this is a very quick run through the keywords that are covered in the 23 objectives, but that tell you how broad and how comprehensive the Global Compact actually is. To give you like a small example how this affects my own teaching. So I teach several courses at our School of International Public Affairs, and one of them is called Migration and Human Development, and I mainstream the Global Compact in many of the things I do. I teach one session on root causes, where the idea about the drivers are discussed. And I don't like them, by the way, in the GCM. I talk about immigration integration class and look at that. I look at emigration policies and then look at that. I look at return migration and I combine it with what the GCM is doing. And lastly, a lot of the class is talking about migration, remittances, diaspora, investments, and development. And again, the GCM has many aspects. But also, I teach another class which I just finished. I'm finishing this semester called United Nations and Globalization, which is a general class, not a UN and not a migration class. And the GCM is what's called, I'm quoting, a non-legally binding cooperative framework. So if you look at questions from global governance perspective, right? One of the key questions one can ask is, in what ways can the global compacts be tools of global governance? What is the role of soft law? And especially today in a world where we see increasing realist pressures, right? A lot of people asking, how can you enforce global norms against reluctant states? And we see a lot of people, states who are not abiding by international law in a very blatant way. So then the question is, how can soft law play a role? And I think discussing the role of the global compacts, including the GCM, is actually very interesting. For example, I discuss the governance impact, and I'm borrowing this from my colleague, Sakido Fukuda Power, who created something like similar for the Millennium Development Goals, with a governance impact, where it can be a standard for performance evaluation. For local governments and national governments do the planning as self-regulation. Funders more and more look at this as a requirement. And now we have a limited set of indicators that actually measure this, that can have an impact for how states do this. But also knowledge effect, more and more research, what the UN is doing, what other stakeholders collecting in terms of information is connected to the specific objectives and the sub aspects of those objectives. And then also thinking from a perspective of norm making, the GCM was created after 2 years of very intense discussions with civil society, with academia, among governments. And that, one could argue, had a kind of an impact for how governments thought about migration governance. Very importantly, of course, the official review progress, right? So the International Migration Review Forum, which will be happening again next week, is such an important venue, a platform where states can be held accountable to some extent. They have to present something. There now are national voluntary reviews where not all countries, but several countries submit them. And ideally, the process at the national level, where ideally they feed consultations with civil society, with migrant-led organizations, with others actually into this process, which can lead to certain pressures and incentives and ideas for reform. And lastly is more and more people taking this as an advocacy tool. Civil society, the UN Network for Migration, which is very essential for the entire IMRF. All these different norm entrepreneurs can use the ideas and the fact that it was endorsed by the entire world, basically, as an advocacy tool. Today, we will discuss some of the substantive questions about migration governance, right? How exactly, what is part of the Global Compact? How can we translate this and include this into academic education? We can also talk about, again, how soft tools that don't have many teeth in enforcement can have an impact. I'm personally very eager to learn from the colleagues here, from the students about their approaches, experiences, and ideas. Today's workshop has two main objectives. The first objective is to showcase the concrete and replicable academic model that many of my colleagues you will learn from have used. And the second objective is we're inviting everybody on the call, and maybe even after the call, to spread it to other colleagues, to invite you to make pledges, to commit how to sustain the integration of the Global Compact on Migration and the IMRF and follow-up mechanisms into teaching, research, and outreach. We believe that academia and student and professorial associations and communities can play a big role in making this a reality. Now, enough by way of introduction. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our first speaker, my colleague, Dr. Younous Arbaoui, who is Assistant Professor of Migration Law at the Vrije University in Amsterdam. His research focuses on global migration law, especially interplay between the Global Compact and the UN Migrant Worker Convention in North Africa. He has focused a lot on the genesis and the potential of treaty bodies and on global solidarity in the field of refugee protection. Among many other accomplishments, he also leads the Global Migration Law Hub, and he coordinates the Migration Law Clinic. Dr. Arbaoui, it is a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us. I'm looking forward to learning from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel, for this kind introduction, and also for sharing insights from your own work. Very interesting to hear about your work. I hope to have the opportunity in the future, especially in New York, to exchange more about that and to learn from you. And yeah, hi everyone. Nice to have you here with us today during this side event. Yeah, in my presentation, I will I think that the screen is already shared. I will just make sure if the slides can. Yes. Okay. So I will outline the course called Global Migration Governance. It is a second year course at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, Faculty of Law, and it is one of the courses in the Law in Society program. And this academic year, we gave this course together, me and my colleague Inga Broers, who couldn't be today here because of holiday plans, in September and October. So the course was given in September and October. So let me start with the course objectives. The main course objectives are threefold. The first one is related to the subjects we pay attention to during the course. And the aim there is to increase and to gain understanding of core legal concepts of global migration governance. So, for example, the relationship between soft and hard law, but also the role of international organizations and the various differences between international instruments regarding migration. Secondly, an academic objective is that students be able to read and analyze legal and policy texts. So besides academic articles discussing and analyzing migration-related issues, students are expected to be able to analyze these documents besides other policy texts like United Nations texts, but also state reports regarding the rights of migrants in their countries, civil society reports, reports by UNHCR, IOM, international organizations. Another objective of the course is that students develop certain skills, especially the skill to represent certain perspectives from the perspective of civil society, but also from the perspective of states, basically, and also to develop their research and writing skills. And besides the ability to speak in public, so to present a paper, to present a draft report, and also to discuss it in class. So these are the main objectives of the course, and the course format, the course in fact consists of lectures. The duration of the course is 7 weeks, including the assessment. And during the lectures, lectures are largely traditional in the sense that the professors explain the core concepts of global migration governance and relate them to international instruments, in particular the GCM, but also the Global Compact for Refugees and the Migrant Workers Convention and ILO conventions. In this context, also lectures covered the role of international organizations like IOM and UNHCR and ILO, but also the relationship and the collaboration between these international organizations. So the picture also of the complex picture of global migration governance was also part of the lectures. So every week there is a lecture and there is also a working group or a tutorial or a seminar, we can call it differently. And this year we called working groups IMRF exercises because they focus on IMRF. I will explain more about these IMRF exercises. And the assessments in the course consists of a midterm short essay on campus in the sense that it is a closed book exam, midterm exam, in which students write a short essay about, for example, this year, the assignment, the question was whether soft law has any sense if it is not legally binding, why it could have an impact and why not. And students were asked to reflect on both sides and give examples based on academic literature, for example. And then at the end of the course, there was a final take-home essay. And there, students were asked to choose a topic they like during the course, a question, complex question, and to write an extended essay about it at home. So they can conduct research, write, yeah, and then submit through our Canvas system. So that's the course format. With regard to the IMRF exercises during the working groups, the first session was basically an introduction to the IMRF, introduction to the IMRF exercises. So what should be done in terms of homework, what we will be do during the session itself, and what is expected to do after the session. In addition, there was also an explanation of how to conduct research, how to write policy-oriented papers, how to work in small groups. Yeah, so some guidance, IMRF skills guidance and IMRF exercises guidance. And in session 2 until 5, each week focused on one of the GCM objectives, which we can see on the slides. Objective 5 about legal pathways, Objective 6 about ethical recruitment and decent work, Objective 13 about alternative to immigration detention, and Objective 15 about access to services. And we were struggling as teachers also to select on which countries we will focus on. We conducted some online research, and also we decided to select 4 champion countries. So countries which expressed their commitments to implement the GCM effectively in collaboration with the United Nations Network on Migration. So we selected also countries from different regions of the world, the global north, the global south, European Union, North America, Africa, and Asia. Yeah, to have different geographical contexts. So during the sessions 2 until 5, each week students work on one objective, and in small groups they work on different countries. And also there, students are divided into civil society groups and state groups. So before each IMRF session or exercise, students have homework which consists of conducting research, looking for documents about the situation of migrants in Canada, for example. Let's take Canada as an example. Look into the state's reports of 2022 and start from that year to see whether there is a progress from the perspective of the states, and then another group works on the perspective of civil society. And it is desk-based research, of course. And based on that, the draft preliminary reports, state reports or civil society reports. And then during the session, we organize block negotiations. So states come together, Canada, Ethiopia, Portugal, Philippines, and then discuss the progress they made and the challenges they face. And civil society gather together and discuss the gaps and try to formulate some recommendations. And in the second part of its session, the block representatives present the preliminary reports, and then we start a debate. There were some challenges there because this year presence was not obligatory, so sometimes some groups are disappointed because one or two, for example, didn't show up and they have to do the work themselves. And sometimes the negotiation was also not so much effective because of absence of some members, but we will solve that next year by an obligation to be present during the course. So it's also for us as teachers a learning process. And after each session, there is still some homework to do, which is the finalization of block reports. So students work again together to finalize the drafts they have, and then they have to submit it through Canvas, our system, and then the teachers collect this and try to bring them together. In the final sessions, which were very exciting because we, as a group, teachers and students, we're working towards something together to produce something. Before the final sessions, students had to consolidate their weekly reports, both from the state perspective and civil society perspective, into a consolidated joint state or civil society report. And during the session, there were presentations, plenary debates, and the simulation of the multi-stakeholder hearing, about which my students who are also today present will say more about that, because it was also organized by them and led by them. And the course ended by a draft progress declaration, which was a bit challenging, I should say, because it was also the end of the course and there were some students didn't show up, but we exercised also the progress declaration at the end, and we made them, especially regarding Canada and Portugal. And then what we call from the course or from classroom to United Nations, the teachers, after the course, the teachers, together with my colleague Inga Broers, we started to edit the reports, the final reports submitted by the students, with the aim to publish them, and also with the aim to submit shadow reports. So at the end, we decided not to write a report for states, but and reports from the perspective of civil society, but to bring them all together and call them shadow reports, because we, as you know, states will submit their reports with a lot of, with almost only progress and best practices. So we thought, let's do like what civil society is doing for treaty bodies, to submit a shadow report in which we also show the progress, but we emphasize more the gaps and challenges and formulate recommendations. And the report, the shadow report, was sent to the IMRF, the United Nations Network on Migration, with the aim to inform the discussions during the IMRF itself next week. And of course, we have been preparing this side event. Students were informed at the end of the course that we plan to organize a side event to present their report and also the course. And as last point, students will also participate at the IMRF next week. So four students, two of them are today present. So to leave it here, this is the outline of the course, the structure, and also the final output. I would like now, if Daniel agrees, to give the floor to Daniel and Jure, two of our excellent students who were engaged from the beginning of the course until today, and hopefully until next week, to share their experiences.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Arbaoui. I hope everybody can hear us well. Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, so now me, Daniel Roogman, and together with my fellow student Jure Velstra, we're going to talk about our experiences in the Global Migration Governance course at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. In my opinion, this course was very different from a traditional university course, as instead of mainly focusing on the lectures and focusing on specific theory, we were actively involved in a simulated international process from the beginning. So we worked with real countries and real GCM objectives, which made the course feel much more practical and relevant. In our case, we worked on extensively on Canada. So this meant that we not only studied migration policy in theory, but also looked at how it was actually implemented in practice. So including both policy commitments and the challenges that come with them. Another key aspect of the course was the UN style setting. So we took on roles as either state representative as us, or civil society actors, which required us to think from different perspectives and adapt our arguments accordingly. One of the most important moments was the multi-stakeholder hearing simulation in week 7. So during this, we had to present our position, respond to critiques, and engage with other actors. So this showed us that how important it is not the only content of your argument is, but also the way you communicate it and frame it. So especially in terms of diplomacy, your tone, and strategic wording. So I think overall this made the experience feel really realistic and engaging for us. Then further, some skills we have developed throughout this course. So I think through this course, we developed several important academic and practical skills. So first, we strengthened our research skills and source evaluation skills because we worked with a wide range of materials, so including official state reports, NGO shadow reports, and policy documents. And therefore, we had to critically assess their reliability in the perspective of each source. Second, I think we improved our policy-orientated legal writing skills, as we learned how to write in a more formal, structured, and concise way that aligns with the UN-style documents. And then third, the course helped us really to develop our negotiation and diplomacy skills. So during the simulations, we had to defend our positions while still remaining open to other viewpoints, and which required us also the careful wording in our argumentation and a strategic approach to this communication. Also, in addition, our presentation skills improved, I think, because there were regular discussions, debate, and formal presentations in front of the whole course, and in some cases also our specific seminar. And then finally, I think we learned how to work more effectively under time pressure, as each seminar required more preparation in advance, but also the ability to quickly process the information and respond during these sessions themselves. So, for example, by arguing with civil society in our case, as we were state representative. And now I'm going to give the floor to my fellow student, Jure Veldstra.
Good evening, everyone. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Jure Veldstra. We work together on this course as a team, as representatives of the state of Canada. I will reflect first on the course. Through the course, one of the most important insights we gained is that the Global Compact for Migration is not simply a document. It is an ongoing process. States commit to objectives. But commitment on paper does not automatically translate into change on the ground. What struck us the most was the gap between formal frameworks and actual practices. Time and again, we found that countries had policies in place that looked strong on paper, but that implementation told a very different story. This is not unique to one country. It is a structural feature of global migration governance. Global governance is also very complex. It involves multiple actors, competing interests, and different levels of accountability. This course helped us understand that complexity not as an obstacle, but as something that needs to be navigated carefully, which is exactly what forums like the IMRF are designed to do. That brings me directly to our shadow report, because it's precisely there that we saw these reflections come to life. For our shadow report, we assessed the implementation of Objective 6 and Objective 13 of the GCM in 2 GCM champion countries, Canada and Portugal. Starting with Canada, we did find genuine progress in some areas. On Objective 6, Canada has ratified 9 of the 10 ILO fundamental conventions and has policies in place that formally prohibit employers from charging recruitment fees to migrant workers. On Objective 13, the recent end of immigration detention in provincial jails was a meaningful step forward, and the alternatives to detention programs show that a real policy commitment to reducing reliance on detention. However, significant gaps remain. On Objective 6, the tight visa system continues to bind workers to a single employer, creating structural dependency and leaving workers vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, in some cases even document confiscation. On Objective 13, there's still no independent oversight of the Canada Border Service Agency, no maximum time limit for detention, and children continue to be held in closed detention facilities, in direct tension with the best interest of the child principal. Based on these findings, we made 2 recommendations for Canada in the shadow report. First, replace tight visas with open work permits that allow workers to change employers freely. And secondly, introduce independent oversight of immigration's detention and set a clear maximum time limit to prevent arbitrary and prolonged deprivation of liberty. Turning briefly to Portugal, because as we said, we were state representatives of Canada, so we did not focus mainly on Portugal, but in our shadow report, we also showed that Portugal has a strength is a non-employer led residence permit system, which gives migrant workers genuine flexibility to change jobs without losing their status. However, in practice, individual assessments before detention are rarely carried out, with detention often applied as a default rather than a last resort. We therefore recommend that Portugal strengthens the mandatory implementation of individual assessment and actively expands alternatives to detention beyond policy and into actual practice. That's it for the shadow report. I think we also showed our reflection on the course. There might be any questions later. We will be happy to answer, of course. And with that, I think I can give the floor back to Younous. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Daniel and Jure. Just to wrap up in terms of next steps, of course, because also like the GCM and IMRF, our course is also an engagement, is also a process. And the next step, one of the next steps is next week that our students, 4 of our students will participate in the second IMRF. And hopefully we will have some time to speak during the multi-stakeholder hearing. But one of the assignments students will have during that week is to produce daily reports on the IMRF. So each student will be in charge of one of the days and observe, take notes, and write reports, record short videos about what happens there, but also themselves to reflect on what they see, what they observe. And the aim, in fact, is to use these daily reports, which will be, of course, later edited by the teachers as materials for the next year, the course edition of next year, so that students, new student next year will have more concrete insights from the field produced by the students. And to wrap up, why this matters? Because in fact the GCM, one of the guiding principles in the GCM is the whole of society approach, which means that not only states are encouraged to implement and engage with the GCM, but also various stakeholders. One of them is civil society, but also universities, so academia. And in that sense, our course and our university, in fact, engages or responds to the whole of society approach in this way by making the course having societal impacts by informing, by producing knowledge, of course, but also and training students, but also to create bridges from academia between academia and practice. And that's why we called also the said event, but also our simulation of the multi-stakeholder hearing at Vrije in Amsterdam, from classroom to the United Nations. And hopefully this could have some impacts in practice. Thank you for your attention. And if there are questions, of course, we are happy to answer them during the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Arbaoui. Thank you, Daniel and Jure. That was like a fantastic deep dive into your course and experiences. I actually would love to get a copy of all those nice reports that you're going to do next week for my own an advancement. But we will now go to the second faculty presentation, and we're moving 5,000 miles from Amsterdam to Portland, or 8,000 kilometers if you count in kilometers. And just as a little reminder for the structure of today, so we had the first case study, we now have the second case study from Portland, and after that we will open the floor for a discussion. So if you have any questions, if you have other examples you would like to share with us, if you have any experiences you can contribute to the discussion, we will look forward to this. So also think about in the next few minutes while you listen to Dr. Golesorkhi and her team about these issues. So without further ado, we now come to Dr. Lara-Zuzan Golesorkhi, who I think is the mastermind of the entire program today. She is an associate professor of political science and global affairs at the University of Portland. She also is the executive director of the Center for Migration and Gender and Justice. It's an NGO that I think recently got full UN consultative status. Congratulations on that. And we here at Columbia had the privilege to collaborate with her in several events before. So I know it's a very, very active NGO that Dr. Golesorkhi is leading. In her academic capacity, she explores how laws, institutions shape and are shaped by human mobility and gender hierarchies. She explores questions of power, sovereignty, identity, migration governance, and community-based learning. And Dr. Golesorkhi, we look forward to learning from you today.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for the kind introduction, and to Younous and students Yuri and Daniel for your insightful presentation. I learned a lot, and I want to give due thanks to Younous, of course, for co-organizing this event with me. We actually have another one coming up during the IMRF. I'll share about this a little bit more. It's about data innovation for inclusive migration governance. So stay tuned for that announcement towards the end of the session. In any case, very happy to be here and to connect the classroom to the UN, as I like to do, with many of the courses that I teach, and having the pleasure to do so with my phenomenal students who are presenting, as well as who are here to support their fellow students today. I would like to frame the contribution from the University of Portland as a faculty member and joined by students Anthony Gish, Susie Swanholm, and Norma Lopez Paz by first introducing the course, Global Migration and Displacement. This course has developed significantly since I first taught it in fall 2018, when I started at the University of Portland as a visiting assistant professor. And I would say that this development is telling, as it shows a trajectory of course design innovation, which I would like to think has shaped the success of it. So here are some basics of the course. It is an upper level seminar style undergraduate course. Usually about 15 students max take this course, consisting mainly of juniors and seniors. So that is third and fourth year bachelor students. And it entails one semester long course project plus additional weekly assignments to help guide our classroom discussion. The course in its comparative global scope is offered regularly, but I do teach other courses on migration, and they always inform then this kind of major course on the global scale of migration governance. As many new faculty members at universities do, I inherited this course. It was entitled Comparative Immigration. And I started teaching this course, as mentioned, in fall 2018. And Daniel gave us a little bit of the context of how the Global Compact for Migration migration and a global compact on refugees came about. And it was actually exactly in this fall semester when negotiations were taking place to establish these two compacts. So as somebody that does scholarship but also considers themselves as a practitioner, it was really important for me that even the title of the course itself reflects this more. So I retitled the course Global Migration and Displacement, and that's how it's been since then, to align again with the simultaneous negotiations for these two compacts, to have and to be able to incorporate this real world component into the semester syllabus. So the first iteration of the course really had a lot of significant interest and led me to think about how from 2018, when both the compacts were established, how can we move into this through a more applied practice to the first International Migration Review Forum, which is in the fall before that when I next taught the course. And again, the timing here was intentional, as I had worked with a group of 5 students that had taken at least one of my previous migration courses and were enrolled for said course to prepare them for participation in the IMRF. And so this learning experience that I think truly embodies the idea of today's session, from the classroom to the UN, then altogether included at least 2 migration courses, the Global Migration and Displacement course being required, summer research, and a semester-long practicum for a year-long engagement. The summer research and the spring practicum involved the conceptualization and the application of the Gender Migration Index, which is a monitoring and evaluation tool for the gender-responsive implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. The motivation for this index actually emerged from the lack of then not having an existing indicator system. This is actually the first International Migration Review Forum coming up, where we will have an indicator system that was established. For the first one, there was not. So as a civil society leader, I thought it was important to establish something that will actually assist with the civil society reporting that we just learned about. And it is through my NGO, the Center for Migration, Gender and Justice, that we were able to facilitate accreditation for the forum. And you can see the students that were part of this group here, and 2 of them were ultimately, along with myself, were able to speak at the IMRF multi-stakeholder hearing, and we shared our findings there. And this experience then inspired me to yet again innovate the course design for the next iteration in fall 2023, which here the timing was again very much intentional to align with the Global Refugee Forum. So looking at the other, some might say sister or sibling compact to the Global Compact for Migration. And I'll move to the next slide. So it is this 3rd iteration that the course project, as it is structured now, really came into being. And this course project entails 4 key components: a progress analysis based on member state documents on their implementation of the respective compacts, so wherever they might be aligned in the semester. For the Global Compact for Migration, this pertains to the voluntary national reviews that we learned about submitted, whereas for the Global Compact for Refugees, this pertains to pledges made. The project requires an intra-regional comparison as a research methods learning aspect, and it follows a 3-part structure to accumulate in a 25 to 30 page paper consisting of an introduction to the respective compact, a comparison of 2 countries, and subsequent recommendations for individual member states and the region. And then the project concludes in presentations of findings, which we'll hear about in just a moment. So this is what we followed for this semester's project as well. But we had a slightly different applied learning experience, namely a simulation of the live negotiations of the Progress Declaration, which again, they directly aligned with the semester. The zero draft for the Progress Declaration was published in March, and we directly went into looking at it, and students compared what they saw and what they researched in the voluntary national reviews with what the zero draft of the Progress Declaration ultimately stated. So the simulation followed a three-part or three-step process, if you wish. First, we held a Progress Declaration workshop to choose from the two comparative countries, the one country to focus on, to begin their analysis, and to just kind of brainstorm and ask questions as they proceeded through the exercise, looking at the Progress Declaration that had just came out and was just published. And then based on this, the students submitted a 2 to 3 page Progress Declaration input draft on progress made, the challenges that remain, and recommendations to move forward for both the chosen country, but also the region, whichever respective region that they worked on as a whole. And this, of course, was a very timely. So there was a lot of movement, a lot of kind of brief reflections and feedback provided to then properly prepare for the Progress Declaration negotiation simulation. And for this final part, and I will stop here and then pass it to the students to share their experiences. For this final part, the students identified one amendment that they sought to make to the zero draft Progress Declaration based on their input outline. So just as the negotiations were taking place live with the various versions that we've now read, the students also did exactly that based on the research that they had conducted. They selected a specific text to revise, and they prepared to negotiate their proposed amendment in a 1-minute pitch. And you will hear from the students about this experience in a moment, all of whom successfully, although not without contest, negotiated their amendments. The single most debated proposed amendment was on digitalization, and I would like to highlight the discussion here briefly because I think it speaks to where we are at currently in terms of migration governance and what are some of the emerging topics where we might not see, where we'll see continued discussion around. So this proposed amendment was brought about by a student who focused on consular protection and made a strong case that while member states may recognize that digitalization is the future, this needs to be supported properly and not just through technical support, as it was stated in the Progress Declaration, but financial one too. And so this negotiation around these few words really allowed for an insightful exchange among students about the pros and cons of digitalization and emerging technologies such as AI in migration governance. And it was truly engaging and will certainly stay with me as a powerful teaching moment. And this said, I will now introduce the student presenters from the University of Portland. So their presentation is now taking place here in this setting. I am delighted to introduce Anthony Guiche, who focused on the region of Africa and specifically Niger and Sierra Leone on Objective 11 and the focus being borders. Susie Swanholm, who researched on the Asia-Pacific region and did a comparative analysis on Japan and Korea, around Objective 18, so with a focus on labor. And Norma Lopez-Paz, with a focus on Europe and comparing the UK and Turkey on Objective 13, so focusing on detention. And again, a warm welcome again to their classmates who are here to support. And I will now pass it to Anthony to share out findings. So each of the students will present kind of their findings of their research, how they experienced the negotiation, and then they will collectively share a few reflections on the course and this project specifically. Anthony, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Golesorkhi. So I focused on Sierra Leone and Niger. Just quick overview. Niger is a landlocked country in the Sahel region of West Africa, sharing a border with 7 states. It serves as a key transit zone for migration across the region, and in recent years, political instability and ongoing regional conflict have contributed significantly in shaping the migration and border security challenges. And in comparison, Sierra Leone is a coastal nation in West Africa with a smaller population, and their internal dynamics have remained relatively stable since the early 2000s. Migration is mostly internal and economically driven, with many people moving to urban centers. And so, focusing on the 11th objective, which emphasizes the integrated and coordinated border management to improve security while protecting the rights of migrants. This is especially important for Niger, where porous border and regional conflict in the Sahel make coordinated border management essential for addressing the irregular and conflict-driven migration. And for Sierra Leone, the focus is more on strengthening border systems to enhance regional cooperation and internal migration pressures. In both cases, the GCM border management provides a framework for balancing state security with human rights and safe migration pathways. And so, consulting the zero draft and these unique internal and external dynamics, progress made in both, but specifically in Niger, remains in the community-based and child-sensitive alternatives to detention, the upgraded identity tracking systems. These are systems such as MIDAS and Pisces, and then, of course, improvements in technical trainings and border infrastructure and the implementation of those services, especially in borderlands, which is a persisting problem, particularly in Niger, which, of course, challenges in Niger and Sierra Leone. Those remain to be gaps in cross-border collaboration and coordination, the complex regional dynamics, and the rights that continue to happen at borders, the rights violations that happens at borders and in borderlands. And so my recommendation was to encourage the establishment of new regional cooperatives that increase the technical and infrastructural assistance, as well as increased financial assistance. So I took the amendment from the zero draft, and I had changed successfully 2 aspects of it that would encourage quote, the establishment and deepening of frameworks for cross-border collaboration that account for the realities of states navigating complex geopolitical dynamics. And then further supporting that with like the increased technical and financial assistance, again, going directly towards infrastructure, training, and data systems. I argued that there must be an affirmation of support for countries in Western Africa, particularly the Central Sahel, where unique regional dynamics have contributed to instability, and further that room for emerging cooperative frameworks must be upheld. First, acknowledgement, then support will increase border governance capacity, under which as is constrained.
Great. Thank you very much, Anthony. We'll next hear from Susie.
Hello, good morning, evening, wherever you are at right now. I focused on Japan and Korea. I was interested in looking at labor migration, especially as both states are facing similar demographic crises with rapidly aging populations and low birth rates. So I thought their policies would be pretty interesting to focus that comparative analysis on. And I was looking at Objective 18, which focuses on investing in skills developments and facilitating the mutual recognition of skills and competencies for migrant workers. So these are Japan focused, as that's who I was representing in the simulation. But some main areas of progress are a shift from their former trainee status to worker status, which shows more of a commitment in migration governance to permanent residency paths, which is great. There's also been the establishment of a tiered skill recognition program through the specified skilled worker statuses, which has offered a pathway to permanent residency for a lot more migrant workers. And then also there has been more of a commitment to holistic support for skills development through their comprehensive measures for acceptance and coexistence of foreign nationals. The government has recognized that professional growth requires social stability as well. So expanding language education, addressing housing and medical care needs has become more of a priority, which is definitely progress. Some of the key challenges are the continued human resource framing of labor migrants, which is a significant ethical challenge as it's reducing migrants to economic units or this outsider framing, undermining social agency and a sense of belonging. And while the specified skilled worker status is an improvement, there's still a system of hierarchy and exclusion established in having it be a two-tiered, resting on assumptions that one must be work ready to be like a valuable asset to the country, which ties into that human resource framing. And then, as mentioned, there's a lack of status mobility between those different statuses. So there's no pathway to permanent residency if you enter Japan as one status. So some of my recommendations for this was to develop a framework for the recognition of prior learning, expanding skills verification methods to include recognition of informal skills and prior work experience that can't be matched by standardized exams. This could look like portfolio or resume-based assessments or skills demonstrations, depending on what the industry might be. Also enhancing support for skills development in the workplace, promoting policies that would incentivize employers to actually go through with this ongoing professional development, and then also developing a formal social coexistence certification for private sector employers would just see higher standards for social integration of the migrant workforce, especially as the legal minimums often are not sufficient. So then on my next slide, thank you. Oops, one back, I believe. Perfect. This is from the first recommendation for future implementation in the zero draft. And I thought this was interesting because it was in alignment with one of my recommendations for Japan. I added the language of including the recognition of prior informal learning and experience because while I think the zero draft correctly identifies the need for skill recognition, as I previously mentioned, it overlooks the hidden talents of millions of migrants that aren't quantifiable by standardized tests, which is still definitely a concern under Objective 18. And my classmates in the negotiations had me add the phrasing and experience, which I thought was a great addition and a cool example of the back and forth sort of dialogue that we had going on. Because after hearing my pitch, they pointed out that that seemed to actually kind of better encapsulate what I was trying to say. And I was happy to add that because it shows like the commitment to former work experience beyond just learnings has an academic connotation. So it's a lot more inclusive in that way. But I'm happy to hand it over to Norma now.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you everyone who is joining us here today. So my research focused on Objective 13, alternatives to detention of the Global Compact for Migration. So this objective emphasizes that detention should only be used as a last resort for a short duration, for as short of a duration as possible, and always with full respect for due process. The objective pushes for non-custodial alternatives to detention, but emphasizes the protection of children, ensuring access to education, healthcare, and preserving family unity, regardless of migration status. While the compact promises alternatives like community-based programs, these options are still underdeveloped. So speaking to progress, addressing the destination country, the United Kingdom's Action Access Program, a community-led model for case management, it shifts away from detention by allowing migrants to remain in the country while their cases are being processed, reducing the harm caused by confinement. It provides practical and emotional support, including housing, casework, and access to independent legal counseling, which improves fairness and decision making. The program is also more cost effective than detention and has expanded from its initial pilot in 2020 to include a broader group of participants. So the project offers one-on-one case management supported through partnership between the Home Office and nonprofit organizations. And in the context of the Republic of Turkey, human-centered migration policy is applied with priorities in addressing irregular migration at its source and encouraging burden sharing. So unfortunately, there are still significant challenges. These efforts remain limited in scale, reaching only a small portion of the detained population. COVID-19 unfortunately disrupted early implementation, and there are still gaps in handling delays and unexpected issues such as a global pandemic. More broadly, the UK continues to rely heavily on detention with no official time limit, which undermines the effectiveness of alternatives. Community-based programs, while promising, are still not widely developed nor implemented. So for recommendations, to address these issues, my recommendations stem from the National Center of Social Research's list of recommendations to the UK, which too is applicable to more broadly the other member states associated. So first, the development of multilingual materials so participants clearly understand the purpose and scope of the programs being offered to them. Second is strengthening coordination and data collection to improve the communication and effectiveness of programs. And then finally, the enhancement of the Action Access Program, specifically the oversight through the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to ensure transparency and accountability of the existing program. So switching over to my next slide. I took from the Zero Draft paragraph number 22, and my recommendations here are to change the word welcome to affirm and to add the bit here, case management utilizing practical and modern pastoral support. So we seek to affirm the expansion of case management programs as a community-based and rights-based alternative to detention, utilizing a practical and modern pastoral approach. So practical support encompasses housing assistance, transportation, translation services, financial and legal counseling, as seen in the Action Access Program. But additionally, this means individuals better understand their cases, navigate complex systems, and ultimately improve protection outcomes. And then pastoral support is a secular practice focused on mental and emotional health resources. We understand that the migration process can be incredibly stressful and isolating. So providing emotional support not only improves immediate well-being, but also helps individuals build stability over time.
And we will now hear, thank you so much, Susie and Norma, for sharing your findings from the course project. We will now hear from all of them just overall reflections on what they learned, specifically from the negotiation part of the project, but also more generally having worked very deeply on the Global Compact for Migration in real time as negotiations were taking place and as we're now 1 week away. So maybe we'll pass it back. We'll begin with Anthony for some overall reflections.
Yeah, so this course has certainly taught me about the unique ways individuals choose to or are forced to engage with mobility, and that sometimes these drivers of movement can interact with each other, or sometimes they exist alone. And so I think for me, this course was just extremely eye-opening in that way. And then, of course, the historical legacy of migration and movement and how it dates back to further than I could have imagined. And of course, the legal frameworks and the development of those and how those interact with the identities. The second portion of the class focused on displacement and the experiences of migrant communities and migrant individuals. And I felt that that second portion, when we read stories from a book called The Displaced, which is excellent. Thank you, Dr. G, for providing that book as course material. That deeply impacted my learning in a profound way.
Susie, if you may want to share your reflections about the course, but also the course project and the negotiations.
Yeah, so I learned a lot, especially in the negotiations, about the importance of careful linguistic choices in policy, but also through my semester-long project where I was continually examining terms like low-skilled or foreign nationals for some examples that are Japan-specific in my project and the larger negative consequences that using such terminology can have on migrants and society at large. But I really appreciated that this course gave me a more comprehensive understanding of what non-legally binding frameworks actually look like in practice and how that varies state by state. So I think that was really interesting, especially hearing all of my classmates' contributions from their unique research experiences. I think that was a great takeaway.
Thank you, Susie. Let's pass it back to Norma for final reflections here, and I think then we'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the biggest takeaway for me was just understanding what alternatives to detention can look like. I think we are very familiar with one of the two very common approaches to migration systems, which is the enforcement and confinement approach, which follows like punishment, focus on control, and detention and restriction. But through my research and through this course, thankfully, I was able to learn a bit more about the contrasting approaches, which is more of a rights-based approach with a Center for Humanity and Dignity through the entire process. So essentially, it recognizes that every individual deserves fair treatment, regardless of their migration status, even in the case where remaining in said country may not be possible. So although during negotiations I had very little push from my classmates, I felt like it was, a great experience to learn, what alternatives are out there and that they are possible, although currently now on a very small scale, but they do exist and they are and have proven to be quite successful.
Great, many thanks to all of you, Anthony, Susie, and Norma, for representing us here. And we'll pass it back to Daniel, our moderator.
Thank you. I think we can, by the way, stop sharing the screen. Dr. Golesorkhi, Anthony, Susie, Norma, this was terrific. And I think it's always interesting to see how us seasoned migration scholars, right, who have worked in this area for a long time, we can learn a lot from the excellent work that you guys students do. So thank you a lot for sharing that. We will now open the floor for discussion. And you may have seen I put a few comments in the chat. So first, whenever you want to take the floor, please raise your hand looking at the React tab, which is a little heart symbol. And at the bottom there, that is like signals to me that you would like to take the floor. When you get the floor, please briefly introduce yourself. Just to jog your mind a little bit, what you could think about is, well, you could have questions for any of the courses and the design questions, the impacts that we heard from the Vrije University in Amsterdam or Portland University. You could also, for example, both of these courses focused more on the IMRF per se and using more simulations in an IR setting. We haven't heard a lot about how, for example, national policymakers could implement, right, like parts of the GCM, which is like a different kind of setting. Maybe some of you have experiences. And again, the second question is, look in the hive mind. What are your own experience as instructors or as students with how this has or could be integrated? And the last one is general reflections on or suggestions for courses integrating the Global Compact or the IMRF into higher education. We would love to hear from you. We probably collect a few questions and then give it back to the presenters. So yeah, feel free to, so if you run a hand up, ideally there were lots of hands up, don't be shy. We would love to hear from you. So Paula, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paula. I'm originally from Namibia, but I'm currently based in Turin, Italy, where I have an extensive background in clinical legal education. I actually saw your link through Younous on LinkedIn because I've met him at former legal clinic conferences. I don't know if you remember me, but Oh, anyways, yeah. So basically, at the moment, I'm currently doing a PhD that is looking at creating a arts jurisprudence for migration law.
Yeah, with I remember now, Paula. Yeah, together with
Yeah,
Ulrich. Right, we met. Yeah, I remember. Nice to see you. To have you here.
nice to see you too, Younous. So with saying that, I specifically attended this. Sorry, my baby's just here as well. I attended this workshop because I'm quite interested in curriculums, particularly looking at how to advance curriculums in Europe. With regards to migration law, but also looking at the perspectives because, as many of you know, the third world, as they put it, perspective is still quite excluded. So I was very curious, sorry. So I was very curious to know like how you deal with the issue of integration. Particularly, I think it was Norma Lopez, you were speaking about detention versus integration. So I know these terms seem like very clear, but because on a national level, they seem to get blurry. So I was just wondering in your recommendation, how do you handle the definition at least? Never mind the implementation.
Thank you, Paula. Again, my plea, everybody, raise your hands, contribute, ask questions, give us statements. We also had one question in the chat, broad question where Said Afsal Sadat asked, how can the academic research be better connected to global fora like the IMRF? Again, that's a very broad question, but again, I guess many of us can respond to that, have ideas. But I would love to hear one or two more people from the audience. I know you have probably good ideas, reflections on either of the case studies we heard about or other experience you may have had as instructors or students. But if nobody is willing to step forward right now, we can also give it back right now with these two questions to the presenters. And maybe let me add one. If you were to design a course that is not related to simulations, but to a broader incorporation, more about specific aspects of the Global Compact, how would you do that? What would be key ideas about including some of the aspects, the sub-elements of the policy, of the objectives? How would you integrate that in a general migration class, immigration class, etc., displacement class? Okay. Maybe we go maybe start again with the team in Amsterdam and then go to Portland just to keep with the order. So maybe Dr. Arbaoui and the team. When we go first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Nice to see you, Paula. I remember we have met in Liverpool during the European Clinical Conference. So thank you. I think your question was about integration. It was for the other team from Portland. If I can respond to the question from Mr. Said Afzal about how to connect academic research with the GCM process. I think that one way to do that is to analyze and to follow the process itself from the maybe from the lens of soft law, the potential and the limits of soft law. And I think that assessing the implementation in certain countries can be very interesting case studies. One of my own publication myself in 2022 was about the implementation of the GCM in Morocco. So I went to the field to see what is the position of civil society, for example, toward the GCM. And also the role of the government and civil society in the implementation, the review process. And based on that fieldwork, I could draw conclusions on the potential of the GCM, to what extent it could have a communicative power, it could have impact in practice, although it is soft law. Another interesting angle to GCM, because as many knows, the states have preference to soft law instead of hard law. So many countries who ratified the Migrant Workers Convention, which is a binding instrument, if you look at how they deal with migration issues, you will see that the GCM dominates the agenda, the national agenda, and that the Migrant Workers Convention is sidelined. My upcoming publication focuses, for example, on the cross-fertilization between these two instruments in Egypt, which ratified the Migrant Workers Convention and endorsed the GCM. And I went to the field also to see to what extent these two instruments interact with each other. So I think these are some examples on how to connect academic research to the GCM and IMRF process.
Anybody from Team Amsterdam wants to add anything? Probably. If not, then we can go to.
Yeah, if not Yuri or Daniel, I see now one of the names of our other students, Christoph. I don't know if you would like to say something, Christoph. He from our team, but he was not included because it's a holiday period. But I see him now. Christoph, would you like to share something?
Maybe he needs a moment to collect his thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, if you at some point would like to come in, feel free to raise your hand or send us a text, a chat message. Then, Dr. Golesorkhi and Team Portland.
Thank you so much for these questions. I think I'll pass it first to Norma because Norma was ready to respond, so I don't want to hold her further. I do have some ideas for the other questions as well. So Norma, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I actually first want to just clarify the question if possible. Paula, your question was about pushing integration aside and I'm sorry, what was the question?
Oh, sorry. My question was, how do you deal with the definition of integration in your documentation?
Right. So, that's why I specifically picked the UK and the Republic of Turkey because we have, a destination country versus a transit country. And so implementation will look drastically different. Funny enough, actually, the UK had a bit more of an economic-based approach where through formal migration pathways, we see it being based in education and like existing careers that would benefit, again, holes within the existing economy of the UK, whereas the Republic of Turkey had a bit more of like a human community-based framework existing, which they had a lot more resources in, I would say, research and data collection to kind of build a framework that would predict, I guess, like irregular patterns of migration to better, I don't know, I guess, establish a framework that could handle the movement that happens across their borders. And so, again, implementation looks drastically different, but I have seen success in the case of the UK with, again, that practical and pastoral application of alternatives to detention. And so it's tricky even for me to understand, but I think once you kind of look at their applications and the context of each country, it becomes a bit more clear that both countries, as unique as they are pushing for a more community-based and rights-based alternative for implementation.
Paula, would you like to follow up or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have some emails, so I'll probably email later. It's just more because I'm actually collecting data for my PhD as well. So, but essentially, I was just trying to understand integration more from the cultural perspective, particularly when communities are not necessarily recognized or their values perhaps don't align with the new state that they're in. So how would you deal with that? But I mean, I think that's maybe a longer response, not maybe for this platform. But I just thought I'd put it out there. Thank you.
Yes, many thanks for this important question, and for the research that you're doing. That sounds very interesting. I would like to respond to the broad question of how academic research can be better connected to global forums like the IMRF, and then also to Daniel's question about outside of simulation, what are other things that, how we can maybe incorporate the compacts into curricular. For the first question, in terms of academic research, I would just kind of say, thinking back on the Gender Migration Index that my students and I developed ahead of the first International Migration Review Forum. And this, to me, was truly kind of like an experience of connecting both my work as an academic and relying on my training there to involve students in creating and developing a methodological tool, in essence, right, to assess the progress being made while there was an absence to this. And so I think, so creating, there's research to be created always, and we need that from the academic space, but also thinking about what are some tools that we might create or provide as a way of getting a better sense of what's actually happening in terms of the implementation of the compacts. And so the index, we intentionally designed that it works for both of the compacts, and that it works in a way that it's very much focused on kind of member state submissions of what they say that they're doing, that we then critically analyze, whether it is the voluntary national reviews that are submitted, or whether it is the pledges that are submitted for the Global Compact on refugees, for instance. Which brings me to the second question of, what else can be done. Again, this was the first time that I did a simulation in this course, and I was very intrigued. I thought it was just fantastic in terms of the timing, that we could follow the negotiation. So that's one of the reasons why I chose to do simulations for this one. When I'm teaching the course next, it will be in the fall semester when the Global Compact on refugees will be reviewed. And so the third Global Refugee Forum will be taking place. So one thing that I've been thinking about is, what about students creating potential pledges? Or other kind of ways that, would still very much require robust research and a robust understanding of how the whole process works, but then still creating something that feels very applied and actually reflects what recommendations could be, because pledges are ultimately kind of like an envisioning of where things could go and bringing it together. So that's kind of what I'm tinkering around at this moment, and to have that very nicely again aligned with the timeline. And speaking of pledges, I think Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're both part of the GAIN network, which is the Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network, which is an academic initiative that was actually created as part of the Global Compact on refugees, which is different from how the Global Compact on migration functions. So I think we're actually in a very interesting space with what we're trying to do with this event and the pledge that we are collectively thinking of as academic institutions, to see, here's how this works in the context of the Global Compact on refugees. What might this look like, creating such a network for the Global Compact on migration? I have more thoughts, but I'll leave it here, and I'm also curious to hear what my colleagues think of these kind of thoughts that I'm having.
Okay, we have 5 minutes more, so we are almost at the end of the time that we have. It is obvious that we could have discussions on this for another 2 hours, which in this very moment we will not extend the time to. But I don't know if Dr. Arbaoui, if you have other additional reflections on what Dr. Golesorkhi just said, or if you want me to conclude.
Yeah, not really. I have been thinking indeed about your question, and I think, yeah, I don't have concrete ideas on how to do that, to implement the GCM in another way in teaching besides simulation, but one idea could be indeed to focus on certain issues addressed by the GCM, and then to address them in the lectures, but also to have specific assignments, national assignments for students to, for example, maybe to see how the implementation at the national level. That's also what we addressed in our course, because one of the aims was to look into civil society reports, state reports, to see how it is implemented. I got another idea about, but it is again simulation, to ask students to do kind of moot court sitting to advocate for one side, or to take a specific issue from one objective and draft a moot court case, and then students should plead in favor or against, probably. But I will continue thinking about it, and hopefully we can exchange more through email or when we meet in another opportunity.
Lara-Zuzan?
Yeah, if I just may add here, something along kind of two key developments that I would say that have taken place with this International Migration Review Forum is a question to look into is how can academia or universities or even university curriculum be involved in kind of the assessment of the indicator framework that now exists, right? So we now have an indicator framework, and there are documents being submitted. So how can, and maybe this is more of a research methods kind of component than of a class, to say, okay, here are the indicators, so let's assess, right, by using an existing framework. The other development that I see that would be interesting to look into more until the next International Migration Review Forum are the national implementation plans that are actually coming out. And so there, to maybe compare and contrast of what do the national implementation plans say they will do and what do they actually do. So I think there are more components around the IMRF and the GCM that are coming out that we could leverage on for future courses.
Okay, thank you all for these very, very interesting clarifications. Before I conclude, I wanted to highlight one comment we got in the chat from Nada, who said that she admires how students being actively involved in the hands-on matters relevant for today's migration dynamics. So it's an important comment, reflection on what we are seeing. And just a very short answer from me to Said Sadat, who asked what specifically universities in developing countries can do when they have limited resources to do that. And again, I would say a lot of those things we heard today are not very resource intensive, right? It's about, you need often smaller class sizes. So if you have 400 students, again, that is not easy. You need a smallish. But I have done simulations with 40 students, so I think it's doable, even though it is kind of a hassle. But other than that, it is really just requires instructors and the students to embrace that and do that. I don't think many of those techniques and things that we have talked about today need a lot of resources. You just need somebody who has the time, right? Because creating a simulation, creating these kind of engagement systems is very. It takes some time in terms of the instructor. So I know some colleagues of mine who teach in other parts of the world have a very high teaching load, and then of course it's problematic, right? But I'm not sure we can solve that issue right now. But a lot of these issues, I think, are not resource intense. And if you're a student, you can definitely ask your instructors if they may consider it. If you're an instructor, we encourage you. That was one of the objectives of today's meeting, to think whether some of these forms that you've heard about, or maybe it brought up your own ideas how you could do that. So in the last hour and a half, we heard very concrete examples how to create a structured engagement with the Global Compact and the review process. We heard ideas about how to integrate it into lectures, into assignments, about negotiations and simulations, and many stressed that in your reflections too today. the student experience was very, very lively, and for many of us, it's very interesting to see how students experience that, not just from the design perspective of the instructors. We heard a little bit about the balancing between practice and theory, right? As migration scholars, we often think about the theory too, but this is a practical assignment. How you balance the two was much covered. We thought about how beyond simulations, this could be integrated more broadly in, for example, if you have an assignment about creating a national implementation plan, I think was just mentioned by Professor Golesorkhi, and others. So there are different ways how not just as a global governance tool, but also as from a national perspective, how an NGO, how an advocacy group could use some of the language, use these things as an advocacy strategy. And that ties one of another question that Said mentioned here: how can students be involved? Again, and as student groups, as in advocacy organizations, taking some of the language of this compact, which is not legally binding, but which is approved by the General Assembly, right? It has the backing of the global community. So I think it is more than just a resolution by somebody, but it has actually some standing, and using that as an advocacy tool is a lot more promising than if you said, I think we should come up with detention strategies, right? So again, this moral weight that the global compact has can lend itself to advocacy efforts, etc. We also, I said that in the outset, we invite student organizations, faculty, organizations of faculty. If you're part of some migration scholar or political science scholar or sociology scholarly association, make a pledge, commit how to sustain the integration of the GCM into your teaching, into the research, into the outreach activities. We have only scratched the surface of what can be done, but I think the discussions have been very practical in terms of reminding us what can be done, and I'm sure we'll have future discussions on this, in which we will all learn from you what you have been done in the follow-up of today's discussion. Maybe I see many of you here in New York or online in some other capacity. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the presenters, for the great work you've been doing, and for sharing it with us. I wish you all a great week, and hopefully see you at the IMRF next week or at other locations.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for moderating. Thanks to all of the speakers, and take good care. Be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.